the third world will never develop under capitalism. Well, they were wrong. And Latin America had started developing as a capitalist place a long time ago. Africa and the Middle East are the last places that have not come too far in this. But Asia is just going like wildfire in our time. So that is kind of surprising that it's happening so fast, given the disadvantages. But that's because these countries are not stupid, and they're taking advantage of what they have. So anyway, in the first world countries have all kinds of advantages, and they use them all the time. Now, when we talk about upgrading in Germany and Japan, it's much more systematic, it's much more labor-based. In the U.S., we're much more into big research science and kind of breakthroughs and big, hot, new technologies, which we do very well. Okay, those are two different models. But when it comes to electronics or something, there's nobody close to us still. China isn't close. Even Taiwan with Hinshu Science Park is not close. The U.S. is still far and away the most technologically advanced. The Europeans worry about it a little more because they're not as great in electronics as we are. But by and large, we have all kinds of advantages. So, we don't always use them, as I talked about before. The U.S. has this very lax view of industrial policy. We don't really have to do it. We don't need manufacturing. Who cares? I mean, our manufacturers, some of them care, and they do a very good job. But at a national level, there's almost no attention to this, except a bit of hand-wringing from time to time. And that's not a very good way about going about upgrading. So partly, I guess my argument is partly the reason we've lost so many industrial jobs is we haven't paid any attention to it. We've let them go also. But we have to beware of cheap arguments because, after all, cheap labor always, again, I've said this before, I can't say it again too many times, is not just about wages, it's about productivity. Otherwise, all industry in the world would be in Haiti, okay, or other places that really have very poor conditions for industrial development. And they're not. They go to places where productivity is rising rapidly, modern factories are put in very quickly, and so on. And that's been the East Asian story above all. Lots of investment, lots of good production methods, lots of very competent firms that do this subcontracting. And then, lo and behold, like Lenovo or Acer become competitors in the world market. And you go, whoa, where'd that happen? Where'd they come from? Where did all those Hyundai cars come from? Well, they were subcontracting for Japanese cars. And now they're all over the place, competing with Japanese cars. So no poor country rests on cheap labor. They know better. They know that it's a dead end to simply rest on cheap labor. Maybe a toehold, but you want to get the door completely open and walk through. So you've got to do that. You've got to upgrade your labor, upgrade your technology, upgrade your productivity, upgrade your sectors, upgrade your infrastructure. And that's what they've all been doing in East Asia for the last 30 to 50 years. Chinese are very clear about this. And indeed, if you look at this, is a graph just of China in the early 2000s, when labor productivity was going up faster than wages. Wages were actually rising as China was flooding the world with product after the agreement of 2001, the trade agreement. And yet labor productivity was going up faster, so unit labor costs were actually falling. Boy, that's the way to compete. That is the greatest. That's where capital really gets it all. So the idea that cheapening everything, the race to the bottom, is this dopey idea that some people like Rick Perry have. They say, well, get rid of regulation, get rid of taxes and government spending on infrastructure. Let's just degrade ourselves to the level of El Salvador, and everything will be great. Well, I don't think people in El Salvador would actually buy that. They would like to upgrade. And just grading yourself down, beggaring thy neighbor, and so on, is not a strategy of long-term development. It is just a fool's errand. And then the standard economists, the conventional economists always talk about wage convergence, development convergence. If our wages are going down and theirs are going up, we must all converge someday in the happy middle. But that happy day never arrives. There will always be poor countries on the edge of development and rich countries that are doing much, much better. And indeed, in poor countries, it has to be emphatically said that development does give you rising wages. No question about it. That story's been true again and again and again. We all started poor. Okay? But if you have too much labor glut and too much repression by dictatorial governments, you aren't going anywhere. That's the Libyans. Just a recent example of that was how wages in Mexico collapsed, even as the maquiladores were booming in the 80s and 90s. So the only way you'll get a higher wage is to organize. I'll get back to that. Okay, moving front. Capitalism is still expanding. It is dissolving agriculture. Industry is still spreading. These are things we've talked about. And at the leading edge, capital has the best of all possible worlds, cheap labor plus industrial productivity. What could be better? And global competition is never static. It's a growing system. It's a competitive system. Countries that once were cheap now are dear. Germany was cheap labor. Karl Marx and Das Kapital mocked German labor because nothing can be cheaper. Curious, huh? And then Japanese, when I was a kid, Japanese labor quality, wages, products were mocked for being just cheap junk. That didn't last very long, did it? And now China is facing cheaper alternatives. And in some industries moving out of China to places like Vietnam. Now, I'm not going to go through all this again. We talked about this way back in, I think, lecture 2 on industrialization. And the U.S. has gotten one of these challenges after another from this expanding industrial periphery. And I don't think I have to belabor this. You can look at this slide later if you want. But from post-war Europe through the rise of Japan, through the rise of East Asia and its various parts, challenges from northern Mexico and the maquiladores, China today, there's been one wave after another of new, fast-growing areas with cheaper labor, high productivity, sending their goods back into the United States. Now, of course, that presents a challenge, and it has driven down the rate of profit, as we talked about, I think, in lecture 4. And that creates a problem for the U.S. and for Europe and now for Japan. But it doesn't mean it's the end of the world by any means. But what's curious is we always focus on labor and surplus labor and cheaper labor, and we don't ask, why doesn't the world economy absorb all this new labor? And again, you can have Malthusian answer, well, those peasants just have too many babies. But actually, it could be also the capital isn't growing fast enough. The capital isn't doing a very good job. Maybe it's spending too much of its time inventing new derivatives and not enough making new products. Or enough solar energy and just too much time hogging oil. There are times when you think it's not very dynamic, is it? Capital can be very undynamic. So, and I'm not going to go into it. It's true with the United States, too. Okay, I want to get to the last topic, worldwide struggles, to finish up today. But we do see counterforces as this global wave of development is spread. We see interesting counter developments. And the first one I have here is Latin America, then Europe, then Asia, and then just a quick finishing word on global solidarity. The Latin Americans have been developed for a lot longer. They have a longer history of labor organizing than many places in the global south, a long history of a powerful political left, and of course a lot of dictators and repression, and oscillating from one side to another. But in our time, in the last 20 to 30 years, Latin America has undergone a strong revival. It has had very powerful workers' movements, particularly in Brazil, the most important Latin American country, in many ways it, in Mexico. And of course elected Lula, kind of unprecedented election of a factory worker as president, which you can't even imagine in America. After all, our president, he may be black, but he came out of Harvard Law School. So, huh? No, not at all. No, we tend to think that he's an outsider because he's black. That's what I meant. But he's not very outsider when it comes to his education, is he? Whereas Lula may be white, but he was a factory worker. So that's kind of an amazing achievement. I don't think we've ever had a factory worker president in this country. So that's a pretty big achievement. And other developments in Latin America, which led to, and those developments led to this challenge of, at Cancun, the formation of the G20 to make global policy instead of just the G8, and so on. Some very big changes in the power relations around the world. And of course, Lula and Brazil allied with China and India to bring about those changes. Now in Europe, which has suffered, like the U.S., a lot of problems of slower growth and competition from abroad and so on top of which they have fewer immigrants and an older population than we do. And so their pension costs proportionally have risen even faster than ours are. So they have really much more of a problem of how to support their pension systems and their benefit systems, which are very good. But it takes a lot of economic production to support it. So they have a bigger squeeze in many ways than the United States does. Now, one way around that squeeze is to get around the labor standards, which are so high. And when they brought in Eastern Europe, they did not include Eastern Europe in the so-called social compact of the Western European unions. They had done so for Southern Europe when they incorporated Spain, Portugal, and Greece, but they did not do that with Eastern Europe. And there's also other ways around it, like using temp labor to hire the young, because you can't hire them to regular labor contracts, and so on. That's very popular in France and Germany. And of course, Europe has had a very strong political right recently, going the wrong way, actually, and kind of fortress Europe, very much anti-immigrant, more anti-immigrant movements than here, actually. But with this recent crisis and the attempt to force austerity by conservative governments, by the European Central Bank and so on, all hell is broken loose in Europe. It's not just here with Occupy Wall Street. I mean, in Greece, it's hundreds of thousands of people. It's quite amazing. Italy, they just had these huge demonstrations. In Rome, they were quite violent. In Spain, general strikes. In Britain, rioting in London, those well-behaved Brits, and huge demonstrations against the Tory government. But the UK governments in power have more power than our president does in power, more power to reshape things. And the Tories are not relenting on their austerity budget, which, by the way, are completely insane, and are going to do a lot of damage to England, to Britain. So they're doing exactly the wrong thing, but the opposition is very, very strong. So it'll be interesting how it turns out. Sarkozy in France, for example, extremely unpopular. Merkel may well fall. The last elections in both countries, local elections, moved left. So we'll see Berlusconi is hanging by a thread. And he's a horrible, horrible guy. Disgusting. It's as if Rupert Murdoch were our president. You can't imagine how disgusting it is. Asia, I think, when I subtitled this lecture, Hope in the East, Korea, for example, as it industrialized and really rapidly in the 70s and 80s, had this really dramatic outbreak of labor organizing, some of the most dramatic, violent, and rapid in the history of capitalist development. And the Korean working class got very organized and actually led, and by the way, was led by women, and then helped lead the way to get democracy and to break the dictatorship in Korea. Now, they backslid because of the crisis of 97, a lot of neoliberal backsliding. They have a kind of neoliberal president now, and the unions, the old patriarchal men, took over, and they've slacked off. So Korea was very hopeful for a while, and now it's kind of fallen back. But, I wouldn't expect Korea to be quiet for too long, much longer. China, of course, we're all interested in what's going to happen in China. China is under the tight control of the Communist Party, but capitalism has a way of getting out of control of even something like the CCP. And they had huge numbers of protests, strikes, suicides, and whatnot, mostly in the leading edge of Chinese industrialization in southern China last year and into this year. And as a result, the government had to ease up. It's allowed more independence of unions. It had to step in because too many Foxconn workers were jumping off their balconies and burning themselves up. They're not pretty. Now, Foxconn itself, its reaction is A, to move more factories to Vietnam, and B, to start using more robots. Now, that's classic, right? Run away to cheaper labor or innovate to get fewer workers. But that also raises the technological level, which is in part what they want. Yeah. Yeah, so people would do it to save their families. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, it could be. Yeah. Though I think committing suicide is never quite a rational economic calculation. So the government of China is very worried about this, and they definitely are easing up and letting wages rise. So China isn't just going to be this endless wen of cheap labor. Despite the fact there are still hundreds of millions of peasants in China, it is not clear that China was simply going on being the cheap labor edge of the world economy. Even the Economist doesn't think so. And it is indeed good for China because not only do workers' lives improve, but it builds the Chinese government wants a bigger domestic market, so they're not so reliant on exports, and they want to move up the technological ladder that we talked about back in Lecture 3, which you don't do if you just rely on cheap labor. Interestingly enough, you look at this chart about unit labor costs. Remember how I said they were going down earlier? Well, here, they were actually going up after 2005. See, they were low here, and then they jumped up after that other graph and started going up. They only slacked off a bit with the recession, which hit China too, but not as hard. And then this is an article in The Economist about moving to Vietnam, offshoring out of China to Vietnam. There's also been a lot of political progress in Asia, which is absolutely essential to progress in workers' rights, workers' organizing. And again, if workers can't get organized, if workers don't have rights, wages will not go up, and you will have eternally a stagnant world economy of cheap labor, which nobody wants, neither in the poor countries nor in the rich countries. It's bad for everybody. And we've seen Taiwan also broke through democracy in the 90s, thanks to mass movements there. Indonesia and Philippines brought down dictators in the late 80s. Japan finally in the 2000s broke the monopoly of the conservative Liberal Democratic Party. Thailand finally had a kind of populist prime ministers. They threw out the first one illegally in a coup d'etat, but his sister just got reelected. So there's some kind of motion there. Even in Burma, the generals have eased up. So there's hope, I think. There's a lot of obstacles, and it won't follow. There's nothing automatic. Contrary to a quote I had, I don't know if I put this up for you one time ago, Condoleezza Rice saying, wherever the market goes, democracy will follow. No, it won't. Not unless people fight for it. There's no evidence in the history of the West that democracy came without a fight. It will never come without a fight anywhere. It is not automatic. Capitalism does change the world in a way that makes opportunities to move towards democracy, but it doesn't happen without a fight. And on that, I'll just end on that since we're done. And go global solidarity.